A complex web combining civil disobedience and urban guerrilla sniping. Over the course of decades of resistance to the Israeli occupation, the Palestinians developed sophisticated urban guerrilla warfare techniques in which the urban sniper played an important role. For example, an attack on the Israeli outpost located in the West Bank town of Ramallah in October 2000 showcased the Palestinian skills. The attack started off with a mob of several hundred young men, armed only with Molotov cocktails and rocks, approaching the outpost. The mob used the Molotov cocktails to set cars on fire and the rocks to harass and injure unprotected soldiers, but they did not use what the international community would consider lethal force. This put the Israeli soldiers in a difficult situation because they knew the world would not approve of them shooting and killing teenagers for throwing rocks. However, the Palestinian resistance wanted to provoke an unjustified killing if they could. Without doubt, an unjustified killing would quickly be splashed all over the world in the newspapers and on the internet because accompanying the Legion of Stone Throwers were Palestinian media crews. The media crews set up their cameras as if they were setting up crew-served machine guns in strategically selected positions so they could get good coverage of the angry mob and anyone who happened to get shot by the Israelis. Accordingly, if the mob threw enough stones and maybe pelted a soldier in the head with a good-sized rock, then the Israelis were sure to respond with increasing force. The Israelis would start off with tear gas canisters and stun grenades, escalating all the way to rubber-coated bullets and .22 caliber sniper rifles to wound and put down specific members of the mob who were causing the most trouble. Of course, the camera crew would get all of this brutality on film. On this day, as the groups of stone throwers crowded the Israeli soldiers, several stone throwers went down to Israeli bullets, which were usually aimed below the waist and specifically at the knees. Palestinian sirens soon wailed as fast-moving ambulances careened into the swirling mob to extract the wounded. Just as intended, the rescue of Palestinian youths with gunshot wounds provided great media for the Palestinian camera crews who feasted on the bloodshed. While the ambulances picked up their cargo, they made sure to drop off more buckets of stones and crates of Molotov cocktails to sustain the mob's attack. While columns of black smoke curled skyward from the burning cars and tires and clouds of tear gas swirled around the masses of irate demonstrators, unseen Palestinian snipers used the pandemonium as a screen and slipped into the surrounding buildings, several blocks back from the action. These silent partners of the choreographed mob searched for targets, looking for that one Israeli soldier who exposed themselves for a second too long, or got too careless shooting off a tear gas canister. The Palestinian camera crews never saw these shooters, and either did the hard-pressed Israeli soldiers until the snipers' unseen bullets streaked in above the heads of the mob towards their targets. One of the Palestinian snipers was successful and hit an Israeli soldier in the hip, causing the mob of Palestinians to erupt into a standing ovation as if their home team just scored a goal at a football game. However, the shooting of an Israeli soldier signaled to the outpost they were now facing more than just civil disobedience. In response, the Israelis' own counter-sniper teams, positioned on nearby rooftops, began looking in earnest for a target. Plus, the Israelis had their own camera crews in place on the roofs, so they too could film the attacking mob to later provide video evidence to refute the Palestinians' claims of excessive force and unjustified killings. But as more Palestinian snipers took positions in multiple buildings, firing at the Israeli outposts from different directions, the soldiers were put in the position of either abandoning their posts due to the intense level of sustained and accurate gunfire, or raising the force level. Since a retreat was not an option, the decision to increase the force had to be measured as one Israeli veteran on the scene described it. Since the first day, every time we shoot a person, it is because they deserved it, because they shot at us first. You don't want to shoot civilians and kids. On the other hand, you don't want your soldiers on the front lines to be killed. If I could, I'd shoot the kids with the Molotov cocktails. I'd give my soldiers a shoot-to-kill order, but instead we hit them in the knee. The Israeli outposts asked their higher headquarters for permission to use a tank to open fire on an abandoned apartment building the Palestinian snipers were using as a shooting platform. The request was approved, and a Merkava, a main battle tank, opened fire on the concrete sniper nest. The heavy fire of the Merkava had the desired effect as the mob of teenagers took off for cover, and the snipers in the building had to reposition or get blown up. In the end, this was a media victory for the Palestinian resistance because they could show film of Israelis using main battle tanks to kill unarmed civilian youths. The Palestinians coordinated their sniper attacks so well with the crowds, cameramen, and ambulances because they used an improvised communication system. They had cell phones with ear attachments so the shooters could receive orders and report back on what they saw over the phone without taking their heads off their rifles or their eyes off their targets. As luck would have it, at this particular Israeli outpost, there was an official Palestinian Authority building located nearby, which gave the Palestinian snipers a shooting platform. This way, the snipers knew the layout of the building, could prepare firing positions, and if the Israelis tried to blast out the snipers with tank fire, the Palestinians could get good media coverage of the Israelis using excessive force against the Palestinian Authority police who were only restoring order. During the attack, some of the Palestinian snipers were identified as members of the Palestinian police. In this instance, the Palestinian Authority became the infrastructure to facilitate a guerrilla sniping campaign. The Palestinian Authority provided the rifles, the ammunition, the trained shooters, and the buildings to shoot from. Since the Palestinian Authority was a recognized governing body, receiving tens of millions of dollars in aid from a variety of countries, including the United States, the money needed to develop this urban guerrilla sniping infrastructure was provided by international donors who contributed money to promote peace and stability. While they may have intended to find stability, they also funded Palestinian snipers intent on forcing Israel out of Gaza and the West Bank, one bullet at a time. This attack on the Israeli combat outpost, a scenario repeated over and over during the 2000 Intifada, revealed the complexities of modern urban guerrilla warfare in Israel. The Palestinians put the Israelis in a tough, lose-lose situation by integrating many clever tactics. First, the Palestinians used the teenage mob as a media tool. The use of teenagers was a calculated ploy to engender international sympathy, after all. Who could blame these poor kids who were just being manipulated by their political leaders? Who would condone the Israelis shooting and killing young kids? The use of unarmed kids made the Israelis use less than lethal force, forcing the soldiers to be just as skilled in crowd control as they were in war fighting, a difficult balance for professional soldiers trained for high-intensity combat. The use of ambulances to resupply the stone throwers, to move snipers into position, and to evacuate the wounded was masterful. Again, this put the Israelis in a lose-lose situation. If the Israelis actually fired on the ambulances, like the resistance wanted them to, then the Palestinians would claim Israel was committing war crimes by violating the Geneva Convention, which protects Red Cross and Red Crescent vehicles and personnel from being targeted by military combatants. Even though the Palestinian resistance was already violating the laws of land warfare by using the ambulances for other than humanitarian reasons, there was no doubt the Palestinians would win this media battle. Consequently, the Israelis had to exert extreme professionalism to not fire on the ambulances, even though they knew they were being used to facilitate the attacks against them. The use of Palestinian Authority buildings as a sniper platform was a good technique for the resistance because it enticed the Israelis, just as with the ambulances, to open fire on an ostensibly neutral organization. If the Israelis happened to kill a Palestinian sniper in a Palestinian Authority police uniform, then the resistance would charge Israel with murdering a police officer who was only trying to stop the violence and restore the peace. All of these potential traps, the stone-throwing youths, the ambulances, and the use of Palestinian Authority property, were meaningless if they were not caught on film and broadcasted to the world. That is why the key element of the entire operation was the Palestinian media crews who were there to film the Israelis killing children, shooting up ambulances, murdering police officers, and destroying the surrounding city with main battle tanks. The street battle itself was an act of pure political theater to vilify the Israeli government and gain international support for the Palestinian cause. On April 1st, 2001, a funeral was held for a 10-month-old baby girl named Shalhavet Pass, who lived her short time on Earth in the West Bank town of Hebron. Shalhavet did not die from an irregular heartbeat, dehydration, malnutrition, or any number of afflictions that may take an infant's life. A week earlier, on March 26, Shalhavet was shot in the head by a Palestinian sniper while being pushed in a stroller by her father, Yitzhak Pass, who was also wounded after the bullet passed through his daughter's fragile skull and plowed into his legs. This murder begs the question, why? The shooter could not claim ignorance, since sniping is a very personal act, and every sniper knows exactly who they shoot. Sniping is surgical. The sniper knew they were shooting a baby, or at the very least knew they were shooting at a man pushing a baby in a stroller. But why did the Palestinians have to gain from this? The Palestinians may have killed Shalhavet to get a reaction. To understand how killing a Jewish baby might work to the Palestinians' advantage, we must understand the situation in modern Hebron. Hebron, located in the southern part of the West Bank, is the second holiest city for Jews after Jerusalem. But Hebron's population is overwhelmingly Arab, with some 120,000 Palestinians and only about 700 Jewish settlers living there. The Palestinians did not and do not like having Jewish settlers living in Hebron because the Jews tend to multiply and take over whatever area they move to, creating a new demographic reality. Consequently, Palestinians see Jewish settlement in Hebron as the beginning foothold to a larger Jewish population invasion. This is because wherever there is a Jewish settlement, there is inevitably a nearby Israeli Defense Force base whose job it is to protect the Jewish settlers. Thus, the Palestinians view the Jewish beachhead in Hebron as not only a demographic shift, but a military, cultural, religious, and political invasion of a historically Arab city. One must also understand a central element of the Palestinians' resistance strategy was the polarization of cities like Hebron, so Israel's Arabs support the Palestinian resistance and oppose Israel. The resistance could not afford any Arabs living in the political middle ground where they accepted the presence of Jewish settlers in a predominantly Arab city. The killing of Shalhavet was a step towards removing people from the middle ground because it polarized the Jews by enraging not only the settlers of Hebron, but also of Israel. The Palestinian resistance wanted the Israeli people to hate and lash out at the average Arab, even though they were personally innocent of the murder of a baby girl. If the resistance could get the average Israeli to hate and prosecute the average Arab, then it would be a relatively easy step to get the average Arab to hate and persecute the average Israeli in return. In short, the killing of a baby girl created polarization through a spiraling cycle of violent reprisals and growing hatred. This Arab hatred could then be manipulated by the resistance to build their organization, expand their power base, and accomplish their political goals. The immediate reaction of the Israeli Defense Forces to the killing of Shalhavet was predictable. They opened fire with a tank on the building the sniper fired from. That was not enough for the Pass family or the Jews of Hebron. They wanted the Israeli army to occupy the entire Arab Abu Sneineh district the sniper fired from. In fact, the Pass family initially refused to bury their daughter — Jewish law says the dead must be buried immediately — until the district was placed under Israeli military control. This insistence placed immense pressure on the Sharon government to take action. The Pass family's demand for an occupation of Abu Sneineh was not a new one, since the Jewish enclave in Hebron received regular sniper fire from the district for the previous 7 months, ever since the district passed from Israeli military control to administration by the Palestinian Authority. The Jews of Hebron may have wanted a military solution to the troublesome district, but the Sharon government knew of occupation of Palestine Authority land might escalate into an all-out war between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli Defense Forces, so Sharon refused. But Sharon could not afford to do nothing. Less drastic measures would be taken. The Israel Defense Forces quickly set up checkpoints around Hebron to block the flow of traffic in and out of the city, and a curfew was instated in the Jewish part of the city. This was not good enough for some of the Jews living in Hebron, as the blockaded several roads on their own and even attacked some Arab citizens. Other Hebron Jews went so far as to threaten to occupy the Abu Sneineh district themselves, regardless of the political and military price. This was the reaction the Palestinian extremists wanted. They wanted a civil war to erupt between Jewish and Arab citizens. They wanted polarization. They wanted both sides committed to killing each other as opposed to living peacefully side by side. This was the motivation behind the killing of Shalhavet. This was the politics of murder. The Palestinian resistance may have lessened the outrage of the sniper attack if they produced a plausible explanation for the killing. For instance, if they said a rogue murderer committed the crime, who would then be hunted down like an animal and brought to justice, then public opinion might have been more forgiving. However, the Palestinian Authority failed to present a plausible story. Instead, Palestinian Authority Minister Yasser Abed Rabo refuted the very evidence of the shooting, stating, "We believe that the atrocities of the occupation are responsible for all crimes that have claimed the lives of Palestinians and Israelis." Then the Voice of Palestine radio commentator Youssef Al-Kazaz broadcast on the Palestinian Authority radio station on April 2, 2001. On the matter of the baby settler who was killed in Hebron a few days ago, we already said that her death was a fishy action, and there is information according to which this baby was retarded and it was her mother who killed her in order to get rid of her. The murder of one's infant daughter will affect any father, and the murder of Shalhavet strapped Yitzhak Pass firmly to the wheel of continuing violence. 2 years after the death of his daughter in July 2003, Yitzhak Pass and his brother-in-law were arrested by the Israeli police with 10 pounds of high explosives in their car. The police long suspected Pass and his brother-in-law were members of a clandestine Jewish terror cell conducting attacks against Arab citizens. For possessing explosives, Yitzhak Pass and his brother-in-law received 2-year jail sentence. Despite police suspicions, there was not enough evidence to connect the two to any specific murders. They were released in the summer of 2005. Ultimately, the Palestinian sniper got their wish as the murder of Shalhavet drove her father to commit unknown numbers of crimes against equally innocent Arabs. Politicians in the crosshairs. As can be seen from the targeting of unarmed civilians and the murder of children, sniping can be a political act. A sniper can instigate violence, cause public outrage, and create political dilemmas. Along with influencing regional and international politics, snipers can also be used to actually kill politicians themselves. Therefore, it was little surprise in March 2001 as a newly appointed Israeli defense minister, Benjamin Ben-Eliezer, toward Israeli military bases in the Gaza Strip, he came under fire from a Palestinian sniper. As the defense minister walked down from the roof of an Israeli outpost, a shooter took 2 aimed shots, causing Eliezer's bodyguards to shield him with their bodies. It is doubtful that the sniper actually knew who they were targeting, and it is more likely a sniper working the area saw a target of opportunity. The shooter probably knew their target was somewhat of importance due to the added security and tried to make the shot. Either way, it would have been a coup for the Palestinian resistance to knock off Israel's Minister of Defense. 2 years later, the Palestinian resistance showed that killing Israeli politicians was more than just a case of opportunity. On November 1, 2003, Jamal Akal, a 23-year-old Palestinian from the town of Nazarat in the Gaza Strip, was detained by the Israeli Security Agency, ISA. Akal lived in Canada since 1999 and, in fact, was a Canadian citizen. He only recently returned to Gaza to visit his family. An investigation by the ISA revealed Akal met with Hamas representatives and agreed to assassinate a senior Israeli official when they traveled to the United States in an upcoming trip. Altai's plan was to observe and study the Israeli official's movements in the U.S. and then kill him in a sniper attack. Akal intended to purchase an M16 either in Canada or the United States and even receive training, to include target practice, from Hamas on the use of the M16 while still in Gaza. Even with a dose of good luck, there was only a remote chance this far-reaching operation would ever succeed, but it does show Hamas' intent to export its guerrilla sniper methods overseas to assassinate Israeli officials. Israeli counter-sniper tactics. True, the Palestinian sniper threat remained a constant element of the ongoing guerrilla war, but the Israelis used aggressive tactics to minimize it. First, the Israelis believed in physical barriers to prevent enemy snipers from targeting Israeli soldiers or citizens. Wherever possible, the IDF built sniper-proof surveillance towers, complete with concrete walls and bulletproof vision ports, so Israeli guards could observe the surrounding terrain without being vulnerable. Around many Jewish settlements and communities, the Israelis constructed towering 20-foot walls like some medieval fortress, so guerrilla snipers could not even see the Jewish settlers they were dying to shoot. In other situations, the Israelis used ethnic relocation, where Israeli settlers moved into an Arab area and pressured the Palestinians to move somewhere else. It was difficult for an Arab-Muslim guerrilla sniper to operate in an area populated only by Eastern European Jews. In this sense, Israeli communities were a barrier in themselves to Palestinian gunmen. Only in a town with a mixed population or closely entangled communities could an urban sniper thrive. If the IDF identified a favorite sniper position their enemy repeatedly set up in, they frequently employed structural denial operations to remove this threat. In these instances, the Israelis used huge armed bulldozers to raze these troublesome structures. Since the bulldozers were fitted with bulletproof windows and solid steel armor, the Palestinians were unable to stop these armored behemoths from plowing under their buildings even if they tried. No building equals no sniper nest. Problem solved. Plus, crushing a building with a bulldozer was a lot less dramatic and more controlled than dropping a bomb on a building. It seemed more humane when a building imploded on itself from the dull blade of a lumbering caterpillar machine as opposed to erupting in a volcano of concrete and steel from high explosives. Perhaps the IDF's most preferred response to the threat of Palestinian snipers was their own sniper teams. If the IDF determined the location of an enemy sniper, they moved in several of their own teams to pin the shooter down, cut off their escape routes, and take the shot if they could locate their target. The IDF not only hunted down enemy snipers with their own sniper teams, they used large numbers of counter-snipers as a defensive measure. In these roles, the IDF routinely deployed rooftop snipers during public events, offensive operations, and to protect checkpoints. The IDF was successful in employing snipers as a counter-sniper tool in part because they developed a professional sniper corps that received both formal training and practical experience in the mean streets of Gaza and the West Bank. The Israeli Defense Forces sniping architecture. Initially, the IDF placed little emphasis on sniping. Instead, the IDF focused on fighting large conventional battles with its neighbors as the wars of 1948, 1956, 1967, and 1973 underlined. After these wars, the equation changed when Israel's domestic Palestinian population realized their Arab neighbors could not free them or destroy Israel. As a result, groups like the PLO focused on waging guerrilla warfare as a vehicle for victory. Only after fighting a sustained counterinsurgency campaign since the 1970s did the IDF appreciate the value of the sniper. Once the IDF learned precision rifle fire in urban, populated areas was preferable to their more blunt weapons of war, official support for sniping grew. Today, the IDF has several dedicated sniper training programs which produce snipers with varying degrees of proficiency in urban warfare. Israel's sniper tools of the trade. The newly created IDF had limited time to research and develop the perfect sniper system. From the 1940s until the 1970s, Israel fought for its very existence. What Israel's snipers needed was a simple weapon that was economical, easy to get, and utterly reliable. What the IDF ended up choosing, ironically, was the German Mauser K98. Some of these rifles even came complete with inscribed swastikas, but they were accurate, ammunition was plentiful, and the rifle was proven in combat. While the K98 was the official sniper weapon system of the IDF, many shooters used Britain's Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark I bolt-action rifle. The Mark I had all the same qualities of the K98 and performed reliably in the deserts of the Middle East. From 1948 to 1974, Israel's official sniper weapon remained the World War II-era K98. In 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, Israel received large numbers of M14 rifles from the United States. The M14 was reliable and accurate and could fire 20 rounds from its box magazine. After battlefield testing the weapon against the Egyptians and Syrians, Israel made the M14 the foundation of their sniper corps. But the M14 was not ready for sniper service until the most accurate rifles were hand-selected, fitted with a stock cheek piece, a scope, and a bipod. After these changes, the M14 served the IDF's official sniper weapon system until 1997. In the 1990s, the IDF looked critically at its sniper corps and decided to modernize its arsenal based on American sniper rifles. In 1997, Israel chose the bolt-action Remington M24 as its primary sniper weapon system. While the M24 performed admirably for the IDF since 1997, counter-terrorist forces wanted a weapon with rapid-fire capability. A search for an appropriate system resulted in the 2001 adoption of the SR-25, an extremely accurate 7.62mm semi-automatic rifle that comes with a bipod, loopholed scope, and a detachable suppressor. Along with the SR-25, the IDF adopted another American semi-automatic sniper rifle, the M82A1 Barrett 50 caliber rifle. The Barrett initially piqued the IDF's interest in the mid-1990s as an explosive ordnance (EOD) tool for destroying improvised explosive devices (IEDs). As the popularity of the Barrett grew in professional sniping circles, the IDF decided to buy the rifle en masse and employ it on a large scale, using it for hard target interdiction (HTI) missions like shooting targets through cars and behind walls. The hard-hitting Barrett, the hard-hitting Barrett, impressed the Israelis so much they referred to it as God's gun. Rounding out the Israeli sniper arsenal is the Mauser 86SR, a bolt-action rifle. During the years the IDF used the M14 as its primary sniper rifle, the IDF counter-terror forces required an extremely accurate rifle for close-in urban sniping work. The weapon they selected, the 7.62mm Mauser 66SP with heavy barrel and thumbhole stock, was a military version of a civilian competition sporting rifle. The Mauser 66SP served the Israeli Special Forces for years until it was replaced by an updated version in 1986, the Mauser 86SR. An unlikely urban sniper weapon, the Ruger 1022. Another weapon Israel employed in their urban guerrilla battles with the PLO and Hamas was the Ruger 1022. However, these rifles were not used with the intent to kill. The small .22 caliber round is unreliable as a man killer and certainly will not penetrate common urban mediums like walls, cars, and body armor. But these limitations are fine with the Israelis since they used it primarily as a tool for crowd control. During the Palestinians' two intifadas, the first from 1987 to 1993 and the second from 2000 to 2008, the Palestinians used civil disobedience like riots, looting, and unruly mobs to harass, intimidate, and provoke Israeli security forces. In many situations, Israeli soldiers were confronted with stone and brick-throwing youths who could cause harm to the soldiers, but whom the Israelis could not justify killing outright. The IDF soldiers were in a lose-lose situation because they were armed only with lethal 5.56mm and 7.62mm assault and sniper weapons. What they needed was a weapon that could wound a specific target without actually killing them. Enter the Ruger 1022, which was considered an ideal weapon because it was semi-automatic, had a 10-round rotary magazine, was lightweight, and accurate to 100 meters. Because the weapons were suppressed and fired such a small round, a sniper could shoot from a concealed position and make a silent shot. A well-hidden shooter was impossible to detect. When an Israeli outpost or unit was confronted with an unruly mob, the Ruger 1022 armed marksman aimed for the leader of the mob or a particularly threatening rioter and shot them in the leg. This dropped the target to the ground, removed them as a threat, but left them alive, denying the Palestinians immediate victory. Over time, Israeli soldiers became comfortable using the Ruger 1022s and used them with less discrimination. Because the suppressed rifles seemed almost harmless, they were so quiet and fired such a small round, Israeli soldiers began shooting protesters above the waistline, hitting some people in the chest, and killing them. After several Palestinians were shot and killed in this manner, they protested the Israelis' use of the weapon. The Palestinians argued the .22 caliber round was indeed lethal at short ranges of 100 meters or less, and the Israelis knew this and intentionally killed their victims under the guise of ignorance. The Palestinians made such a stink about the whole matter, the Israeli authorities tightly restricted the use of the Ruger 1022s to prevent any more accidental killings and to deny the Palestinians another media victory. This was a good decision, as the Palestinians were already exploiting the more than lethal Ruger 1022 used by the Israelis. After Palestinians started receiving serious lower extremity wounds like shattered pelvises, some theorized the Israelis were using covert sniper tactics to intentionally and permanently cripple Palestinian protesters. The theory was Israeli forces took a 50 caliber shell casing and necked it down so it would fit the much smaller .22 caliber bullet. Then the Israelis used these custom-made rifles to fire the hypervelocity .22 caliber bullets at the Palestinians. During riots, these snipers were hidden more than 500 meters away so they could open fire and remain unseen by the crowds. The Israelis would claim the grievous wounds made by these hypervelocity .22 caliber rounds were just freak accidents caused by the standard low-velocity Ruger 1022s. The Palestinians never proved the Israelis actually used neck-down 50 caliber shells to create 20 caliber wounds that were difficult to forensically differentiate from one another. However, this idea should not be relegated to the world of fantasy. After all, many Wildcat cartridges used by competition bench shooters are neck-down versions of some larger cartridge. In the 1930s, the Germans used a neck-down 50 caliber cartridge to fit their standard 7.92 millimeter rifle round that was then fired from their Panzerbuch anti-tank rifle. The result was a hypervelocity bullet traveling at 3,500 feet per second and capable of penetrating an inch of steel at 100 meters. The Church of the Nativity Siege, a study of urban sniping. On March 29, 2002, Israel began Operation Defensive Shield, a multi-pronged invasion of several West Bank towns to destroy the Palestinians' insurgent network in those areas. On April 2, before the sun had even risen across the morning sky, Operation Defensive Shield arrived on the doorsteps of the ancient town of Bethlehem. Israeli tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry poured into the city's limits. Around 200 Palestinians, to include member of Yasser Arafat's Fatah movement and the Palestinian Authority police, fled the Israeli juggernaut, taking refuge in one of the holiest places in all of Christendom, the Church of the Nativity. The Palestinians could not have chosen a more religiously and politically sensitive spot for refuge. The Church of the Nativity, built on the very spot Jesus was believed to have been born, was just one of a number of other important religious structures surrounding the adjacent manger square, like the Mosque of Omar, the Armenian convent, the Greek Orthodox convent, the Coptic Orthodox convent, the Franciscan convent, and the Church of St. Catherine. Because the Palestinians were holed up in such a religiously delicate location, the Israelis were limited from using their conventional tools of war to get them out. There would be no tanks firing high-explosive shells or Apache gunships launching Hellfire missiles through the door of humility and into Jesus' place of birth. What made the situation more complicated was not everyone in the church was a confirmed insurgent. Some of the people in the church were Franciscan monks who chose to remain inside to help prevent damage to one of Christianity's most sacred sites and to assist with an eventual negotiated settlement between the Palestinians and the surrounding Israeli forces. Even among the Palestinians, some were insurgents, some were police, and some were civilians with no prior criminal record. Plus, the ornate layout of the church, combined with its construction materials, stone and marble, made it an urban fortress that favored the defenders. Consequently, if Israeli assault forces stormed the church, there would be a bloodbath with the civilians caught helplessly in the crossfire.